If the U.S.-China trade war turns uglier, what other cards do China have to play? The Chinese government seems to have hinted at one potent possibility. On Wednesday, the People's Daily, an official newspaper, published an article on rare earth minerals, warning some in the U.S. government to not underestimate China's ability to protect its right to grow economically. Rare earth minerals are a type of natural resource which are essential to key products like phones, electric vehicles, even advanced weapons. China absolutely dominates, for now, the industry, accounting for some 70% of global production and nearly 90% of processing, which U.S. industries rely heavily on. So what are the chances that China actually plays this card, and what impact could it have on the U.S. economy? Joining me in the studio is Professor Gong at the University of International Business and Economics, and from Washington, Douglas Smith, former Assistant Secretary at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Gentlemen, welcome to The Point. Now, to have a better understanding about China's current dominance, let's say, of rare earths, let's take a look at some figures here. For instance, according to the U.S. government data, Chinese mines account for about 70% of global output. We're looking at that green line there. And the remaining 30% come from Myanmar, Australia and the United States, plus a few other countries. And last year, China processed 90% of the rare earth ores into usable oxides. So, Professor Gong, let me go to you. Why China? Is it only because that rare earth minerals are found in China?
Yes, we hold a lot of the this kind of materials compared to other countries around the world. I think there's a report from the American Geology Society saying that 90% of deposits of these materials are located in China. And in addition to this, the processing and the mining of these materials are quite labor intensive and also quite polluting, actually. So for many years, these operations have been existing in China, in the province of Inner Mongolia and other parts of the country. So there's a historical reason why we had a very large operation. And also, I also want to point out that the downstream production of these materials, that's the industry of processing these materials into magnetics that are being widely used in many different industries for different applications, are also to a large extent located here in China. As a matter of fact, I know a lot of them actually located in the city of Ningbo in Zhejiang province here.
Okay, let's make it extra clear, as we have a few extra audience members today, maybe. So you are saying, basically, the reason why China has a dominance in the global supply of rare earth is not because it is only found in China, but more because China is willing to explore it. Is that what you're saying, John? I
think that's very much true. I think, first of all, in terms of the total amount of materials available on the ground, China still holds a very large proportion of it. But other countries also have that kind of material. Especially, I think, the United States also have some.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the United States. I understand that the only rare earth mine in the U.S. is in Mountain Pass, and it has to send its ore to China for processing. So, Douglas, what can you tell us about that? What more can you tell us about that?
That's an excellent point. I mean, Mountain Pass has had a bit of a storied history. In fact, about 10 years ago or so, it was actually shut, or actually a little bit longer than that, and then once again reopened. The challenge is, actually, they can be self-sufficient in the United States just off that one mine alone. But your guest in the studio makes an excellent point. The challenge here is taking those minerals once they're pulled out of the ground and then refining them down to what you need is an insanely dirty process. And that is why it has been exported overseas to countries that are willing to undertake this incredibly dirty process. The mine in California has for many, many years tried to work with the U.S. government to try to change regulations, put in safety measures so that they could actually process on site. So it actually could be an interesting side effect if China was to push this aggressively. In the short term, would there be a hit? Yeah, I think it would be. But what could be interesting is it could actually create a self-sufficiency in the United States that has never been here before.
Yeah.
I seriously doubt that this current administration in the United States has thought that through. But it could be actually an interesting point that could happen. The biggest reason it's the refining happens in China is that they're willing to do this terribly disgusting, toxic.
Yeah. See, I want to jump in here because this is
the mines out.
Yeah, this is actually one of a kind of common thing about the businesses in China or about manufacturing here in China. People often, let's say, accuse China of absorbing the jobs, of taking their jobs away, of taking their manufacturing away. But China also took in the pollution, right? Also, or kept the pollution, John.
Yes, this is what you said is exactly right. As a matter of fact, the United States was self-sufficient based on that operation in Mountain Pass owned by Maricorp at the time. And the fact that Maricorp went bankrupt is precisely because of the lower cost competition coming from China. And at the time, the cost in China was quite low, I think primarily because of the low labor cost as well as the, in my opinion, the lax environmental regulation at the time. But I think since then, China has strengthened regulation, environmental regulation in this aspect, and I think the cost has indeed gone up.
Sorry to interrupt you, because actually in the past China had taken measures, right, to put some kind of restriction, some kind of regulation to the export of rare earth. Now, when the United States, when the trade friction between China and the United States continues to escalate, at least that's what we are seeing, there is no stopping at this moment, and some are describing any possible move on rare earth by China as some kind of a nuclear option. But exactly what kind of options does China have on top of the tariff that China already will put into place, in effect, actually starting in just a couple of hours, John?
Well, China actually tried this before. Vis-a-vis Japan, I think several years ago. At the time, we were embroiled in this dispute of the Diaoyu Island at the time, and China was publicly saying, the government was publicly saying that we can limit exports of these materials to Japan at the time.
So you're thinking that the Chinese government, when you say that Chinese can use this, by this you mean China can restrict export? Is that what you?
Well, this is one of the options
we could possibly see.
That's right. I mean, this is an option. I'm not advocating that option, but I think that's indeed an option if we go down to this path of sort of a very confrontational situation. When China is indeed cornered with all kinds of tactics from Washington, I think this even this is, in my opinion, is not a very the best option, but it's one of the options on the table that we can do.
Yeah. Well, Douglas, what kind of damage do you think it will do to China if it indeed opts for this card?
Well, I would offer 2 points. One is just sort of historical, and one is for the future. Just historically, as your guest was sort of alluding to there, a number of years ago, China did this exact same process against Japan, and it basically had zero effect for a variety of reasons, black market smugglers, etc. But it had very, very little effect. I think looking to the future, in the short term, in the United States, do I think there will be a hiccup? Yes. Do I think that people will no longer have iPhones? Absolutely not. If anything, I think what would happen is it would force the U.S. to become far more efficient, look at more effective ways to do this. The most important element in this is the supply, of which they have. What they need to get through is how do they process the supply. And so I think if China really puts their feet to the fire, there are other solutions out there, and in the short term we might see market prices increase. But as your guest also alluded, a lot has changed. I mean, environmental practices in China have gotten much stricter, which as a result, that difference between the cheaper labor costs, the cheaper operating costs in China are coming more online with the rest of the world, making them less competitive.
So still, you call it a hiccup, but I mean the Chinese must also do their calculation, right? Otherwise it will be a stupid move to say this is going to cause you damage, whereas it actually will not. So John, even if in the short term, what kind of potential damage this could have on the U.S. economy, whether it is on the consumer front or on, high technology in the weaponry? Right.
I think on both sides they will be affected. In the short run, I think on the consumer side, we'll definitely see the prices of iPhones probably will go up. It's not just the processing of the material itself. It's also concerns the production of these magnetic materials. And China has a huge industry. There's only one operation that I know of, which is actually owned by a Japanese company in North Carolina, by the name of Hitachi Metal. It has, a corporation of making these magnetic material, the neodymium magnetic material that's used for this vibrating device in iPhones and for a whole range of other applications. And certainly, I would expect that the price of these things will go up. Now, in terms of the impact on the military application, I think the Pentagon definitely already has an inventory of these
Plan
things.
B?
Yeah, they have an inventory of these things. So it's a strategic material, and they for some time they will scramble to look for supplies.
All right.
But over the long run, I think if we really go down to that very unfortunate past, that I think they will revamp the Operation California and Mountain Pass and go on to the
self-sufficiency. Yeah, exactly. This is going to be my next question to Douglas. Although in the long term the U.S. might be able to do okay, how long is it going to be?
Well, I don't think it'd be as long as we think, and I think the reality is, the single most important.
Like how many years would you talk about?
I think that's a wild card question, because what caused Molycorp to go bankrupt before and the challenges in Mountain Pass has been the restrictions, the environmental restrictions. Now, since that time, they've gotten a lot more clever and a lot smarter in how to refine these products. So I think, if the U.S.'s back is up against the wall, obviously they're going to lower a whole lot of restrictions to make sure they can get online a whole lot quicker. But what I would say is that if iPhone production has to slow slightly in order to maintain military superiority, that's going to win out every single day. And I think people will survive if they can't get the latest iPhone, for a couple extra months, and the trade-off is that the U.S. military maintains its dominance. They'll live with that. In terms of bringing in a fully operational facility online, I think it could create a really interesting market opportunity in this country.
Well, how about the environmental damage that it could bring, right, to the United States? Will it be for a couple of years or even a decade, some kind of burden on the U.S. Ecological system, locally? John?
I'm not really an expert on the operation part of this, but I know that for a fact that this operation is actually quite polluting, and the impact will be there. And I would imagine residents surrounding the community would be probably complaining about these things. And also keep in mind that Mountain Pass is a quite remote area in California, on the border between California and Nevada. So I'm guessing not many people will be affected, and in an extreme case that the United States government really need to rely on this, I think the environmental impact will probably take a back seat.
Okay. Well, in 2010, a U.S. Government Accountability Office report study concluded that developing the requisite metallurgical capabilities could take up to 15 years. So it doesn't sound to be too long, but not too short either. Douglas, very briefly, 20 seconds, please.
Yeah, I would just say briefly, that was 9 years ago, and I think the advances in technology, as Moore's Law has shown us, go so quickly. So I'd be interested to see what a study in 2019 would show. And my guess is it's a lot less than 15 years.
All right, John, your guess?
Well, Moore's Law doesn't apply here. Moore's Law applies to semiconductors. Okay, it talks about the number of transistors increasing within 18 to 24 months. But I agree that things have changed a lot. The technology has changed a lot, but not that fast. Not according to the Moore's Law, in my opinion.
All right. Well, let's see. Maybe we'll come back in a couple of years when that factory is reopened. Many thanks to my two guests, Professor John Gong at the University of International Business and Economics, and Douglas Smith, former Assistant Secretary at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security.